Welcome to the 5Es presentation in this series of PowerPoints to Ponder with me, Bruce McMullen. Now, because of the many different facets of learning and teaching models and strategies like the 5Es, you may choose to pause this presentation from time to time and collect and maybe even record your thoughts, but that's entirely up to you. If you haven't already looked at the lesson planning presentation in this series, now would be a good time to look at it because this presentation on the 5Es is more than complimentary. It can be found in the unit news and announcements part of your Moodle site for this unit. So we continue. This presentation, as I have said, looks at the 5Es as a teaching and learning strategy and provides some tips on how to prepare lesson plans using this approach. Sounds familiar with your assignment? Again, I remind you that what follows are my thoughts and a few that I've collected from my colleagues and have used with their permission, of course. And these thoughts offer a personal perspective and a précis of some important information that I think is strongly supported by the literature and backed up by many years of personal experience. So let's get on with it. This statement by Ken Appleton clearly supports the notion that the 5Es approach is an effective means to design and present a series of lessons or activities to work toward the achievement of specific syllabus outcomes. Now, Ken is a highly respected Australian educator who was engaged by the Primary Connections team to fine-tune their modules. He trialled them in schools and oversaw the improvements prior to publication. And now that you're at least halfway through this unit, you're no doubt familiar with the Primary Connections materials. And we'll have noted that they present trialled and developed examples of 5E sequences to address specific outcomes. It's clear then that this 5Es methodology will force you to conform to a framework that develops a lesson sequence where the roles of the teacher and the student are prescribed, but yet they shift as the unit progresses through 5 distinct phases. Also, what it does is give you one of those multi-purpose tools I've mentioned to apply with the same approach and processes to a variety of lessons throughout your career, and you will get better at it. Now, at this time, if you would like to have another look, you should consider carefully the slightly outdated examples available at this link at the bottom of that page. I'll give you a second to pause and write it down for later, or you can pause now and go there. Okay, you're back. So let's move on. The application of the 5Es is a central focus to your second assignment. In another unit that you may be familiar with, Dr. Peter Fletcher prefaces his submission template for one of his assignments with this. And my thanks, of course, go to Dr. Fletcher, Fletch to everyone, for his permission to edit and post and make reference to his philosophy in this presentation. I would refer you at this time to the Word document called Fletch 5Es, located in the same folder that you found this presentation. Perhaps you should pause this presentation now and have a look at the first 3 pages of that document. Back again? Okay. A point about relevance. As with all of Fletcher's approaches to teaching, he first makes the subject or the topic, and the topic in this case is an assignment to design lessons. He makes that topic important to the learner. And in this case, he clearly points out how you should value this assignment experience as a means to practice with constructive criticism, a process you will be fine-tuning for the rest of your career. That is, lesson planning. But before you consider Fletcher's spin on the 5 E's on the last page of his document, let me present to you my version. So when designing a lesson sequence to teach a particular concept or achieve a particular outcome, you have a rough time frame to teach the unit, and hence you allocate a number of lessons to each phase. Now please note, each phase may take more than one lesson, which I suppose begs the question, how long is a lesson? Usually the engage and evaluate phases are the shortest, but you need to go with the flow, and hence the need for lesson plan flexibility. Let's look at these phases in a bit more detail. A quick introductory look. Engage is where you create the yearn to learn. So you dangle the carrot of excitement and fun and relevant learning in front of your learner. In the explore phase, you provide opportunities for the learner to find answers to questions posed during the engage phase. Now they may be their questions or your questions. During the explain lesson or lessons, the learner devises explanations for their new observations and their collected data to share with one another and ultimately you. It is in this phase that the teacher may introduce new terminology, scientifically correct terms. In the fourth, elaborate phase, it's the chance for the learner to apply their new understanding to a slightly different situation or scenario, and hence consolidate and broaden the new knowledge or skill or understanding. Finally, in the evaluate phase, both you and the learner are able to assess the new knowledge or understanding or skill of the learner. The resources you used can be evaluated. The approach you adopted and how the sequence may be improved can be considered. I would suggest a slight change though in the emphasis here, and rather than assess learning, I'd like you to consider empowering the learner to celebrate their new self-constructed knowledge and conceptual understanding. Let them negotiate with you how they would prove to you how clever they are now. Now that's just an overview. Lots of detail and examples and evidence of improved learning outcomes is available in lots of resources, but in a bit more detail. Now some of these resources are presented for you on the 17th slide in this presentation, so be patient, we'll get to it. I present here, however, a précis of information and examples of the application of each of the 5 E's. Detail in the first one, engage, and letting you consider the other 4. So, in no particular order, you aim to create in this a yearn to learn. You wish to pique the interest of the learner. You want them to learn more. You do this by finding a way of making the need for more knowledge about a topic important to that learner. You make it relevant. A real challenge until you get the hang of it. But once you get the hang of it, it becomes easy. So if you can convince someone that they want to know more about something relevant to them, they'll find a way to find out. You also work with the learner. You consult with them. You elicit questions that they can work toward answering for themselves. And you negotiate how they may show you their new learning. Now, if you haven't already done so, here also you find out what the learner already knows about the topic or the concept. You identify their prior learning and then build on it. Successful engagement results in students being intrigued, puzzled by and actively motivated in the learning activities. And of course here the word activity means both mental and physical activity. Oh, a quick note about behaviour management. If your learners are engaged, they will get excited but not bored, not mischievous, and not prone to distract others. Here are some examples of engage activities. You could conduct a demonstration, an exciting one. You could ask questions that really challenge the learner. You could guide play toward a particular outcome. You could offer a manipulative activity, etc., etc. There's one there, the KWL strategy. It is very good at identifying prior learning and setting goals for the learner. You could also have concept maps, etc., etc. Okay, hoping that I've piqued your interest in the other E's and the interests in their examples so you can seek from them ways of including them in your assignment. But more importantly, in the interests of time, I recommend that you look at each of the next 8 slides with a view to recognising the logic behind the sequence in terms of building on existing knowledge with new and sometimes discrepant information or experiences. Information that doesn't quite fit with the student's preconception. So look carefully at what the teacher and the student do in each of the next 4 phases. In this phase, for example, you provide opportunities for the learner to investigate new perspectives on their knowledge and experience with, where possible, hands-on and collaborative activities. The learner may ask questions of you, but you do not provide the answers. You show them how to find the answer themselves. You encourage them to ask or discuss with their peers. They may even be encouraged to indulge in some research, which you could organise to take the path of reading or watching videos or the internet to find answers. Or better still, you could offer an exploratory, hands-on, investigative approach where their conceptual understanding is questioned by miscreant events and then broadened and strengthened as a consequence of building in this new experience. I suggest you pause this presentation now and carefully read this slide. Here are just a few examples of the sort of things learners can do to explore. You'll note that the primary connection strongly supports the application of the predict, observe, explain model. Again, I would suggest you pause this presentation now and carefully read this slide. Here are just a few examples of the sort of things the learner can undertake to provide an explanation of the phenomena under investigation. Plenty of ways of presenting their information to their classmates or another chosen audience, perhaps their parents, perhaps another class. But please, with any presentation, ensure that you take into account the audience and don't make it too hard for the presenter. In the elaborate phase, they are the characteristics. Again, I suggest you pause now and carefully read this slide. Here are some more examples of the sorts of things the learner can do to consolidate their newfound knowledge of the phenomena that they've previously investigated. Now we come to the evaluate phase. Once again, pause now and carefully read this slide. Notice toward the end of the role of the teaching and learning activity, the emphasis or reference to metacognition. This is the process whereby the learner transfers knowledge to other situations within their experience and creates links between them. That's real learning. That involves other key learning areas too. Notice also that learners should be given the opportunity to assess their own performance or learning in terms of the identified outcomes. So the teacher can also assess their resources here, assess their approach, assess their strategies, assess their activities to make sure that the lesson goes better next time. And here are some examples of student evaluation. Each and every one of those can be negotiated with the learner. And when the learner is the one that owns the learning, they're proud to show off. So now you've heard enough from me to set the scene as to how this process applies. To consolidate your new experience, it would now be a good idea for you to pause again and to consider the last page of Fletcher's 5 E's, where he puts his interpretation of the application of the 5 E's to you. Once your understanding has been consolidated a bit, you might then like to explore some of the links on this page. I'll give you time to pause, and then we'll look at the assignment in about 10 seconds. An awful lot has been put to you in this presentation, and I understand you are busy, but bear with me a little longer because, as usual, I leave important links to last. Now, you have an assignment to write a sequence demonstrating your understanding of the 5 E's and its application to lesson planning. Again, I remind you of the contents of the lesson planning presentation, so what follows should be a revision with a broader understanding of how it all works. So, what are the steps again? Firstly, as outlined in the presentation, identify the topic and select the syllabus outcomes. Secondly, find out what they know. This may be done prior to the sequence even commencing, in which case it will be diagnostic and may take many forms. A piece of writing, a picture, a series of questions to construct a concept map, a teacher-led brainstorm, with of course the learners recording their contributions, and many others. Now this process then guides the construction of the lesson sequence. So if you do this before you begin the engage, you already know how to set the scene. In step 3, you simplify those syllabus outcomes and make them demonstrable. In the old days we used a term called behavioural objectives. Well, they're still valid in terms of making sure that what you're looking for can be observed, verified, proved. So please don't use words like understand or appreciate. I'd ask you the question, how do you know they understand? In step 4, you map those lesson outcomes to assessment indicators or strategies that you're going to use to conduct the assessment. For example, if I have a lesson outcome of learners will be able to classify examples of objects as living or non-living, then the assessment could be learners complete a worksheet to a satisfactory level requesting that they cut out and paste different pictures of living and non-living things in columns. Now, of course, you could then construct a rubric, and the rubric could define the number of correct responses as unsatisfactory and therefore requiring remediation, right through to acceptable or exemplary. And note this is sort of a competence-based assessment, and it merely requires that you reach a defined standard. In step 5, you really sit down and work out what's going to float the boats of every kid in your class. Make it exciting. Give them things to play with. Use their hands. Make it new, relevant of course, current if you can, and give them plenty of variety to cater for differences. Step 6 in the exploring activities. Once again, you would list those strategies you intend to use and the purpose of the activity. In step 7, the explain phase. You define how the learner will share the newfound knowledge. In other words, how they will explain it. And to whom? Their peers? The class? You? And you identify the questions in this phase that can be taken further, looked at in more detail or expanded upon in the elaborate phase. So, step 9, the elaborate phase. In small groups or individually, you ask the learners to investigate something that has arisen from previous phases. Now, sorry for the typo there. That's not step 5. That's step 9. Step 9. Here is where you evaluate both your performance, the strategies you used, the timing and all of those things, but more importantly, the learner and how much they have learned. You negotiate with them. Here, you heard me mention KWLs previously. Here's where they have a personal review of their knowledge by filling in the KWL. And here is where you conduct, I hate to say it, tests, the summative assessment strategies. In the last step, step 10, you do the paperwork. You provide written and verbal feedback to the learner, stamps or smiles. You record the marks or grades, and then you pat yourself on the back for a job well done. So again, I hope you have found this presentation valuable and challenging. And I would again ask you to provide me with feedback on your consideration of the value of this presentation.